Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gutivate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Welcome, and let's dive into today's episode. What if you could enjoy your FODMAP trigger foods again without the symptoms? FODZYME can help. FODZYME is the world's first enzyme supplement specialized to target FODMAPs. When sprinkled on or mixed with high FODMAP meals, FODZYME's novel patent-pending enzyme blend helps break down lactose, GOS, and fructan, helping you savor every single bite. So if fructans, GOS, or lactose are among your FODMAP triggers and you want to try FODZYME out for yourself, go to FODZYME.com and use our code GUTSHOW to save 20% off your order. That's FODZYME.com and code GUTSHOW for 20% off. Now let's jump into today's episode. Today's Gut Show episode is all about food fear, and especially food fear in the presence of IBS or other digestive disorders, chronic conditions, whatever may be going on for you. So food fear, which can also be referred to as food phobia, and for some maybe food anxiety, is when an individual experiences intense fear or anxiety when it comes to certain foods or eating in general. So there's two different kind of scenarios that this is going to happen. One would be with specific foods or one specific food, specific types of foods. And for others, it may be a kind of more broad in a way that it's any food. So the food is less of the problem, and it's more so the process of eating that is the fear. So we could almost call that eating fear versus just food fear, but it's that the process of consuming anything leads to this fear and anxiety. The fear can range from maybe a mild discomfort to a severe panic attack, and can really have an impact on quality of life, which would vary from person to person. So think about some different scenarios. A more mild discomfort could be a slight tinge of, oh, I'm not sure how this is going to go, maybe a little bit of nervousness about a type of food. And, bringing this into the context of IBS, that may look like, oh, I'm not really sure if this meal is going to sit right with me. I don't really want to have symptoms. I'm a little nervous about eating this meal, but you're still able to move forward with it. Whereas a severe reaction like a panic attack would be this kind of crippling, debilitating fear experience where the eating process probably doesn't even happen, right? Because it's so significant that the body kind of shuts down in that stress state and in that anxiety state, so that moving forward isn't possible. The impact of food fear or food anxiety on quality of life really depends on what the adaptations to that fear look like. So in those severe cases where there is a panic attack, you can tell, quality of life would greatly be impacted, because if you're not eating food, social eating and engagements are definitely off the table. And there may even be an impact on your ability to perform or move forward with your day. There's probably a lot of repercussions there because of that kind of debilitating state that someone could be in, which can happen in those with IBS, in some of those with IBS. We also see this often in, prolonged states of eating disorders, and even with past trauma type experiences with food, like past experiences of choking or vomiting or something like that was a direct response to a food. Oftentimes those past experiences can lead to that more severe reaction and severe presentation of the fear. Now, in a more mild presentation of the fear, the impact on quality of life could be, almost kind of less seen. I call it sort of the sneaky impact on quality of life, where you stop eating your favorite foods and then that progresses to not eating anything, out. So instead of going out to eat, you kind of lean more towards eating at home. Maybe you're cooking, so that's masked a little bit. It may look like not eating anything that you didn't cook yourself. So even from others, like your family or your friends, bringing your own food with you wherever you go, avoiding eating in groups and scenarios, with others. So it can look a little sneaky where you may not realize how big of an impact it's having on your quality of life until you really take a step back and remember maybe everything that you did before the food fear came into play, or even look at other people in your life and see how they're experiencing food too. And, one way I think that quality of life can be impacted is the joy of food, the experience with food. So not even just the connection to others or even eating, foods you love or whatever, those different experiences that I mentioned before, even just the idea of having joy with the experience of eating as a whole. A lot of times food fear, and especially in those mild cases, we start to kind of disassociate a bit, right, with the food that you're eating. And that disassociation then strips you of that joy of the experience. And so you may even lose touch with your taste. You may lose touch with hunger and fullness cues. You may lose touch with that part of you and in your body's experience with food, which can then impact just, overall joy and experience and, all the other parts of your life. So whenever we're trying to identify areas of food fear and food anxiety, this could present as, a physical experience, a physical reaction, and a fear response to eating a specific food or even certain situations. Or it could present as avoidance, which you may, again, mask and deem as being cautious in order to survive. The avoidance behaviors are sometimes less obvious because the physical reaction where you feel your heart rate increasing, you feel that worry, those what if statements come up. We talked about anxiety in our last episode. Maybe you feel that experience, right? Maybe you are having that panic attack and you're shutting down and you feel that physical response to what you're doing. For some people, that can also translate into purging type behaviors where you're trying to make up for the experience you had because of the fear. Like that could be a physical reaction as well. But avoidance reactions can look like, can you leave this off? I want to work around this. That's a safety mechanism, right? Which is not a bad thing, but that can progress into more extreme versions of avoidance, like never eating out. So you maybe eat a snack before you meet up with anyone, but you never order anything, or you only invite people to your house to eat, or you only do things that are non-meal related, like activities with your friends. Maybe you actually push people away and you think of it more as like, I'm just a homebody. I've just become more of an introvert. I just prefer staying at home and doing this instead. But the reality is that you're creating this avoidance behavior in order to separate yourself from this thing that has increased fear or anxiety for you. So these fears and phobias can come from a lot of different past experiences or influences, including, those that may be more traumatic, like I mentioned, like choking on, a steak or a food that was harder to swallow, or even an environment that was more difficult. Maybe it was food poisoning and a more severe case of that, or a vomiting episode that leaves you to feel almost like this kind of traumatic response reaction that's now coming up. There can also be cultural or societal influences, or even influences from providers in your life. So that could be just knowing that something could possibly cause harm. So maybe your aunt told you that, oh yeah, I had IBS and I noticed that lemonade was my biggest trigger. Now, every time that lemonade is presented to you, you may start to have this fear around it of, well, she said it hurt her, like, is it going to hurt me? We see this a lot with FODMAPs because we know that FODMAPs can be major triggers for those with IBS. But whenever that's communicated in that blanket way, then what we may be missing is the personalization there in the actual process. So a lot of people will avoid all FODMAPs and get so minuscule with it because they're afraid of any potential FODMAPs. And even if they do go through the challenges and they do recognize that maybe certain FODMAPs aren't triggers, or maybe we even identify that food isn't even a trigger for them, that fear is still there and their body still may respond to that fear. So there's still maybe some avoidance in place. There still may be those physical reactions in place because those foods have been presented as harmful or possibly damaging. And we see this too with the kind of diet culture piece that comes into play in our culture, where, you know, the hot thing right now on social media is to talk about how everything is toxic and damaging, right? They take, you know, animal studies or even just something someone else said, some guru said, that is so far derived, right? They take like maybe one little chemical in the food that in one animal study, you know, showed this toxic level, but it was the amount that we would never be able to really eat in one sitting, or probably even in our lifetimes. And they extract that into, oh, this food that this chemical is found in is toxic and it's causing all of your problems. And that leaves you to feel afraid and to worry about it. And even just hearing these claims over and over, you know, these influencers that go into the grocery store and they're showing you every item of how bad it is for you and how toxic it is and all of those, you know, different fear-mongering claims. And that can even leave you feeling like there's a lot of fear around the food system and distrust in the food system. And it feels like everything's out to kill you, right? Because that's what's being communicated to you. And whenever that's communicated over and over, and you have this very real condition that you're living with, where you have these lived experiences to possibly food, that will heighten this food fear and phobia to develop. So some other causes of food fear in those with IBS specifically can also be this kind of broader part of just eating, right? Eating fear. And that can come from unpredictability of symptoms. The majority of people with IBS do contribute that their symptoms to be related to food and eating. And so maybe even just knowing, okay, after a meal, I typically feel uncomfortable for a period of time. That's going to lead to fear of eating and kind of get you into a cycle of you're fearing the outcome, and then the outcome happens, and so on. There can also be a fear of having maybe an accident in public, or how bad the flare is going to be. And oftentimes we'll put the weight behind the fear into avoidance of the food or even certain experiences in life, but definitely around eating. And this can contribute to even more of that avoidance and that impact on quality of life, like we mentioned before, because there is so much fear around it. This can also put a strain on relationships, because oftentimes those who have food fear, eating fear, will be overly cautious about what they need to eat, and they may communicate that to others of, I can't have that, I can't have this, can we, you know, I need to look at the menu before we go here, I don't know if I can do this, I need to cancel last minute, I'm really nervous, you know, all of those different things that you have to communicate whenever that fear is present, because it is, you know, eating away at your thoughts and at your mind, and it's consuming a part of you. And so it's going to feed into your relationships, and that can be really challenging for those who don't really understand it. Now for a quick word from our sponsor, FODZYME. Do you miss eating a big bowl of your favorite pasta, or biting into a juicy, wonderful, loaded burrito without the dreaded gut symptoms after? FODZYME makes it possible for you to enjoy your favorite FODMAP-filled meals again. FODZYME can help you reduce your overall FODMAP intake, support better digestion, and enable you to eat and enjoy a more diverse and nutritious diet. FODZYME works by targeting FODMAPs directly. There are 3 specialized enzymes break down FODMAPs before they can even trigger symptoms to begin with, which helps you feel your best during and after the meal. Unlike capsules, FODZYME's unique powder form actually supports maximum integration with your trigger foods, mixing in with the food before you even take a bite. This means that the enzymes start working their magic before you even start eating. Plus, there are no other additives or triggers that you have to worry about. You can learn more about FODZYME and try it for yourself at FODZYME.com. Use code GUTSHOW for 20% off your order. That's FODZYME.com and GUTSHOW for 20% off. You can also find all of the details in show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. Another form of food fear that we can see in IBS, we don't see this as often in IBS, but this is something that maybe those who aren't really experiencing a symptom-related food fear cause could relate to this as well. And that's the fear of eating in public or in front of others. So it's more like a social anxiety disorder, part of that umbrella, where you fear the experience of being in front of others and eating around other people. This can sometimes overlap with eating disorders, not always. There's a lot of different causes for this, but it can be really debilitating and something that almost seems, harder to get through because it it makes sense to avoid, and there aren't certain foods that are avoided necessarily. It's just avoiding the social experience as a whole, and then getting into that social environment in any way can trigger this response. And so this is where therapy really can come into play to help break down, okay, what's actually contributing to this? What's the cause of this? And where can you start to address it to then be able to move into possibly eating food around other people and having those social experiences and that community value. And I mentioned this a little bit with this overlap of eating disorders, but we do see food fear often manifest as an obsession with certain foods or compulsive need to control food intake. And eating disorders can contribute to food fear, but food fear can also spiral into eating disorders. And one specifically that is found in those with IBS and is linked most with food fear is called ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. The fear of this is the food, and we know that this correlates to a lot of digestive disorders because the fear is very real, right? You really do want to avoid the symptoms and the outcome. And so it's really easy to move into a place of avoidance and restriction. And in a lot of ways, even like what I mentioned with the low FODMAP diet, in a lot of ways, you're taught to avoid and restrict. And as a dietitian, what I'll, say to this is that ARFID is very new. It's very poorly understood as a whole right now in terms of how we diagnose it in this specific population and how we treat it. But what we do know is that there is value in modifying diet for symptom control, but we also have to be really intentional and careful about what other disorder patterns may already be present, what thoughts are happening for the person that we're treating and that we're helping as we are modifying their diet, and overall relationship with food and their bodies and their condition. So developing better experiences around food, tools for handling symptoms as they come up so the fear can be decreased, tools for understanding and handling even those modifications that are made. Typically with IBS, the modifications we make to diet are never permanent, and they're not always super black and white or 100%. You never have to follow something so restrictive in order to have control. And if you do, then that means we're not addressing it properly. And so whenever we see cases of ARFID, we see that type of holistic care and caution from providers is maybe missed, which might be contributing more to this avoidance and restrictive behavior. What also will happen often in the development of ARFID is patients and those with IBS kind of left to their own devices and the internet. The influencers that I've talked about, the food lists that you may even just get from your doctor, or maybe you Google and find, even accounts like my account as a dietitian can sometimes be triggering because you're hearing one statement and it's said in a way that's meant to be just very simple and, marketing friendly, but it's not going to take into account you as a person. So you may see one statement about how this one food could possibly be a cause of symptoms. And for those who develop this avoidant and restrictive behavior, that's going to tack onto the list, right? Where it's like, okay, she said apples may be a trigger, so I will never eat an apple again, right? And that's going to take something away. What I often also see in this population with my clients with IBS who come to me and they have more ARFID-like tendencies is that the allowed food list that they have, or their safe food list, starts to just shrink smaller and smaller and smaller. And usually what's happening here is that the non-food triggers or non-food interventions for IBS have been missed. So what we may see is someone starts with a low FODMAP diet, or maybe even they just start with gluten-free, dairy-free diet. Maybe that's what their doctor recommended. They cut out gluten, they cut out dairy, they didn't feel better. Their doctor may not have communicated that if you don't feel better, to add those foods back in. So those foods just stay out. The next thing is the low FODMAP diet. They cut out FODMAPs in the elimination phase and they don't feel better. Again, if you don't feel better in that phase, you should add the foods back in, but maybe they weren't told that. And so then FODMAPs are off the table. And then the next step may be, okay, well, someone mentioned that all carbohydrates or grains may be a problem. And so they cut out grains. They don't feel better. So instead of adding the grains back in, they move to the next thing. It's like, well, maybe it's animal products. So they cut out animal products. so on and so on and so on. And if you're finding yourself in that place right now, there's no shame for that. Again, most of the time, that's because there was not clear guidance given to you. You were not given the proper tools to address that process. And so it can leave you feeling kind of stuck. But the problem was the guidance, not you. It's not your fault, right? And there's a way out of it, I promise. But typically what we have to do there is really get honest about, okay, when we cut this food out, did things even improve? And if they didn't, that means that what got cut out was not the problem. And so really even unlearning these thoughts and beliefs that we establish, based on input from the outside and also input from the inside and what maybe feels intuitive at the time, we have to get really honest about it and see, okay, is that even true? Because that belief may not even be true, but now it's fueling these behaviors. It's fueling these fears that you're living with every single day. Now, if we do know that an eating disorder is present fully, if we know that it's fully ARFID, and especially if the food fear is too much and it's really challenging to work through bringing foods back into the diet, or maybe another eating disorder has been identified like anorexia or bulimia nervosa or binge eating disorder, then the goal is to make sure we set up a team of a dietitian, a therapist, and possibly even a GI doctor if GI symptoms are at play, in order to treat the eating disorder appropriately and then move towards the GI disorder and treating that. It is a delicate balance of what is going to be successful for you. And so there's no shame in needing a full team for proper treatment. So how do we actually address food fear? So outside of the things I just talked about, addressing food fear it takes a lot of time. And often, we need to take a little bit of a stepwise approach to it. Something we have to acknowledge with food fear is that for many people, there is a physical response, and the physical symptoms that present can be nausea, stomach cramps, sweating, feelings of discomfort, feeling unwell. That could be a symptom of the fear or the anxiety versus the food itself. And so oftentimes we may need to treat those symptoms or treat the anxiety if it has become more of a full-blown anxiety disorder, like we covered in last week's episode. And so it is good to note first and assess what's really happening in this response. And for some people, even just bringing awareness to that and understanding that, oh, that experience that I'm having is not me being overly full. It's not a loss of appetite. It's not me responding to the food. It is the fear or the anxiety. And so even just knowing that can help. So we do need to bring awareness to that first. Next, the treatment that we go with could involve a combination of therapy to really help kind of work out the fear itself, give some tools for working through that and those thoughts that are happening, those thought patterns. Medication could possibly be used in some cases. Again, the anxiety episode goes over maybe the value or not of that. And then dietary changes, which is typically going to look like reintroduction of foods. Ideally, whenever we are reintroducing foods into the diet in a situation of food fear, we are doing it in a very structured format, one food at a time, so that we can assess how your body responds, because we also don't want to not acknowledge or ignore the experiences that you've had. And so if the fear is possibly developed from a past experience, we do want to see how your body handles something, and not just handles it in one instance, because there is a such thing as a nocebo effect, where the expectation of a bad response could lead to a bad response. So we want to make sure we're testing it a couple of times and we're slowly increasing the portions of what we're introducing. So again, it can take a while to get there, but we want to do it in a structured way. We also want to make sure, as a practitioner, that the foods that we're introducing first are the most likely to be successful, again, to build up your confidence in building those foods back into your diet. So getting guidance from a well-trained, specialized dietitian is key. From a therapy standpoint, there are different therapies that can be used for these situations. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is particularly effective in helping people manage anxiety and improve relationship with food. And so this may be used, but there are also other therapy options which your therapist would be able to personalize for you. And those who've had experiences with choking or food getting stuck in the throat, or those who have really strong sensory aversions to foods. This is where feeding therapy from a speech language pathologist may be beneficial. And this isn't really talked about as much in adults as it should be. We talk about this often with kids, where if kids are having a lot of like sensory avoidance to foods, and they may get into feeding therapy early. But I know, where I grew up, even in a rural town in the South, we didn't have access to speech language pathologists. That's why I live with the slight list that I have today. And so that wasn't available. And so I've met a lot of adults that I've even worked with that have had a lot of these aversions since childhood, or they've had instances where food has gotten stuck and now they won't eat certain textures for that reason. And it's never been addressed because as adults, there's no one really looking over you eating, right? To notice like, oh, this is not normal and we should get help for this and assistance for this. And so it could be helpful to seek out possible feeding therapy and talk to your doctor about that option as a referral, because it can help you break through that barrier a lot faster. What are some steps that you can take right now if you are struggling with food fear and you really want to challenge it and start addressing it? The first thing that you want to do is acknowledge the fear versus ignore it. The worst thing you could do when it comes to a fear that's holding you back is just mask it or ignore it, because that's not going to make the fear go away. Instead, you want to fully acknowledge that the fear is there. Journaling is great for this. Talking to someone is great for this. Just talking to yourself out loud is great for this, but you do want to acknowledge it. Second, you do want to go slow with the foods that you're adding in. So if you want to challenge yourself to add something back in, maybe you did cut out, gluten and dairy, and you want to start adding dairy products back in because you never felt better, avoiding it, go slow with what you're adding and be really intentional as you are slowly increasing and taking those steps. That's going to help you build trust and confidence and help you have those kind of wins to sort of outweigh the fear. And then celebrate your wins and your progress every single step of the way. The way that, again, those wins become a little bit louder and stronger, where now your expectation is that things are going to go well instead of things are going to go poorly, that we see with the fear and anxiety. You have to celebrate those things. And when you do celebrate, hey, I was able to eat, a little bit of sprinkled Parmesan on my meal today, and then I was able to eat it again the next day, and then I was able to increase it to maybe a mozzarella stick the next day, and then I had it again the next day. Being able to celebrate each step is going to help reduce that fear, because now you've already acknowledged the fear, you're working through the fear, and you're now building up this new focus, these new thought patterns, and this new kind of frame of mind or mindset. For many people, tackling food fear alone is not always the best option. It can be so beneficial to have someone on your team, whether that is a best friend, a significant other, a family member, or a professional like the dietitians on my team, maybe a therapist, maybe a speech language pathologist, maybe a doctor, whoever it can be that can really walk with you step by step, guide you along the way, encourage you, and celebrate with you. That is key. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because it's something that so many of us with IBS experience or have experienced at some point, and we just don't talk about it as bluntly as we should, right? We don't talk about it in the open without being masked by a joke or making it seem like it's not a big deal. It really is a big deal. It can have such an impact on your life that isn't needed, doesn't have to be there. So I hope that you enjoyed the episode. I'd love to hear what you took away from it. And I can't wait to build off of this to go into the next week where we are going to talk about body image. So taking the topics less talked about clearly and bluntly to the next level in next week's episode. So I can't wait to see you there. I hope that you will join me, and please, please, please share anything that you took away from this conversation. Did you like today's episode and wish that you could connect to others with IBS and learn even more about how to feel more empowered in your body with IBS? If that is you, I invite you to join us for the IBS Warrior Summit. This is a month-long webinar series in April for those with IBS to come together, to learn, to connect, and to build awareness. You will leave the summit with resources in your hand to feel more empowered to take charge of your healthcare and your IBS management plan. Your complimentary ticket to the summit includes access to all live workshops and all recordings for up to a full year. So don't miss out. Sign up today via the link in show notes. I'll see you there in April.